Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Sun's out, guns out today. I want to talk about meat targets today. Now, I don't use meat targets. I might in the future if people are really asking for it. I'm not crazy about using the meat target, but I'd be open to it. Uncle Paul liked to use the meat target, as so many of you know. And I've had fairly strong opinions about the meat target over the years since I first saw him use the meat target. And my opinion has changed a couple of times. And I figured I'd just talk about that. And Roy is still using the meat target. I'm sure the viewers of the channel really enjoy seeing that. And they're probably demanding it, which is great. I mean, it can be very entertaining and it can give us some useful information. When I first heard about the meat target and saw Uncle Paul using it, I thought, well, that's cute and I guess it's useful and it tells us something, but really it's not nearly as useful as ballistic gelatin. I mean, if you want to know what bullets are going to do, you should just shoot gelatin. For those of you who aren't aware, the meat target is leather couch skin, followed by pork steak pectorals, followed by pork ribs, followed by a bag of oranges for lung tissue, more pork ribs on the back, and the whole thing, 4 layers of t-shirt on front and back, and the whole thing followed up by the new and improved high-tech fleece bullet stock. So what it usually is. Sometimes he would use pork chops instead of pork steaks. Sometimes he would use tangerines or oranges or something like that, or a watermelon or instead of oranges, grapefruit instead of oranges sometimes, depending on what he could get locally at the store. But the idea was that he would shoot meat, which was a simulation for the intended target. It was a simulation of a thoracic cavity. Pigs have kind of similar anatomy to humans. They're very similar. So shooting the flesh of a pig is similar to shooting the intended target. A lot of people will criticize those who shoot meat as a simulation for the intended target because they say, well, living tissue has lots of water in it, lots of blood, and that stuff is dense and it really affects how bullets operate. And they're correct. But of course, Uncle Paul would include oranges or watermelon, which are mostly water. And so while it wasn't a perfect analog, of course, really it ended up being a pretty good analog for the intended target. Decent or better than decent. And for the longest time I thought, well, that's neat and it's entertaining, but you know, it's not as good as using ballistic gelatin. And then I started comparing his results to people who had shot ballistic gelatin. And what I discovered was he would get almost identical results. He'd get extremely similar results. So if we're getting more or less the same results, then that suggests that the meat target is pretty valid. It works pretty well. A lot of people would criticize the meat target by saying it's not repeatable because ballistic gelatin is essentially the same every time. You have the same formula for gelatin, you use it at the same temperature every time, and you get very, very consistent results. And that's true. Whereas when you get pork ribs, well, they're not all the same, and they don't come from the same animal, and some pork chops are thicker than others, and some oranges are denser than others, or whatever. And that's true too. The meat target is less repeatable and less consistent. But the thing is, Paul would get very consistent results, and his results were also consistent with what we'd see from ballistic gelatin. So why not use the meat target? It gave, I think, pretty valid results for the most part. And it did allow or it does provide some information that gelatin doesn't. Things like what happens to this bullet when it hits bone, because ballistic gelatin blocks don't contain any bone, whereas the intended target does contain bones. And so we would get a lot of information on what bullets do when they hit bone. So yeah, initially I thought the meat target was kind of cute, but not useful. And I thought, well, maybe it's a little useful. And now I'm starting to think it's actually very useful. If I could only use one simulant, I would prefer ballistic gelatin, but I think Paul was very right when he said that he could add some useful information to the conversation about what happens in terms of terminal ballistics by using meat targets. I think he did really well. And I am ashamed that I didn't appreciate that more earlier on. So yeah, I'm very glad to see that Paul used the meat target. I'm very glad to see that Roy is continuing that. I probably won't, simply because it's so expensive. There may come a day when I have enough supporters on the channel, a bunch of patrons on Patreon who say, hey, we want meat targets. Okay, You know, if I've got the money coming in, I can go build a meat target once a month, and we can test some ammo and see what happens. I wouldn't want to repeat things that Paul did or that Roy has done, but you know, if they want to see something that hasn't been seen before, I'd be up for it. So I guess that's where I stand on the meat target. It's not the best tissue simulant or the best simulation of a thoracic cavity, but it's actually pretty good. It's better than it has any right to be. You know, if you're shooting meat, if you're shooting dead tissue, that often doesn't stand in really well for living tissue, except what we see is that ballistic gelatin is a very good tissue simulant, and the meat target is a very good stand-in for ballistic gelatin. I mean, the results are similar, so I'm not seeing a problem. I think the meat target is really useful, and it's great. So those are my 2 cents. You can tell me in the comments what you think of the meat target and whether you think it's a good simulation of the intended target or a bad one, or whatever you think. I certainly find it entertaining, whether or not it's academically or scientifically useful. So there's that. Maybe that's enough reason to build meat targets and shoot them. Anyway, until next time, keep your powder dry.